Right, do you want I Heart Spreadsheets or Orc's Nest?
I Heart Spreadsheets, please.
Okay. Here you go.
Thank you, my darling.
What? Is it on wrong? Do you not like my hat?
Ross has made wearing a hat like 50% of his personality.
And I have a very specific personality that comes out when I'm wearing this hat.
Welcome back to Hardy's Books. Today we are making a second video of the week.
Yeah, not often you get two, is it?
No. The reason for that is because we were supposed to release a full-length vlog about our adventures at the Goldsborough Books Fantasy in the Court event in London.
But we had too much fun.
Yes, and forgot to film anything. So you have got a 3.5-minute video about Fantasy in the Court, which is very good, and you should go and watch it.
Yeah, it's just very short.
It's just very short. So this week we are going to be talking about magic systems.
Magic systems.
Our favourite magic systems, what makes a good magic system, different magical power sources, and some of our favourite examples of those magical power sources.
Yes.
Let's kick off.
Yes, and I think the best place to start is let's just define some terms, because you might often hear the terms hard and soft magic thrown around. It's sometimes difficult to tell, what exactly is meant by that. So I just want to lay it out from the top. Think of an iceberg and think of how much you understand about a magic system. So this iceberg represents your knowledge of magic. You can think of the hard soft scale being how much of that magic is visible to the reader, how much they understand. So a soft magic system might be just a tiny little bit above the surface, maybe no bigger than an ice cube, but you got to watch out because
under the surface.
That's how the Titanic died.
Poof, died.
There's a lot of ice below that surface, and the universe is big, all right. Whereas a hard magic system is kind of imagine the iceberg is about to topple over. There's so much of it above the water.
It's basically floating on the surface. Yeah. I think, is it Brandon Sanderson said that like 80% of his magic system is
above the surface.
You like from the get-go, the reader should understand 80% of how that magic system works.
Yeah, but there are various different approaches, and that's not to say his rules are the only rules that you should abide to. I mean, they're good rules, but there are other ways of doing it, and today we want to talk about some. So let's talk about the seminal work of magic systems, which is Brandon Sanderson's Mistborn series, and this is the Final Empire. This is the first in the series. The magic system is called allomancy, and how it works is that allomancers, these capable people, are protagonists of the story, can ingest metals, and those metals, on ingesting, grant the ingester some power based on the metal that it is, and then they can burn the metal to use up that resource. Yeah. So they burn at different rates depending on the metal.
Seriously cool.
Yeah.
This is a seminal work of hard magic.
Yeah.
It's so cool. This is a series that I started reading when I was first getting back into fantasy, when I was like 19, 20. If you haven't read it, what are you doing? Go and read it. Carry on.
I get the impression you really want people to read this. The way that this magic system works means that as a reader, you can have that kind of majestic payoff when the systems that Brandon Sanderson has kind of put in place can be used to then solve issues in the plot. And this is his first law of magic systems, is that the harder the magic system is, the more the reader knows about how magic works, the more you can use magic to solve issues that face the characters, solve conflict.
Because we all know how annoying it is when you get to the end of a book and suddenly all of the plot points are resolved by a mechanism that you didn't even realise existed.
Yeah.
Like a magic system that you didn't realise was even a thing. And you just go, how was I supposed to know that was a thing?
Well, you call it the Deus Ex Machina, don't you?
Don't do that, authors. I know a few followers. Stop it.
That's why this rule is in place.
It's so annoying.
This is Brandon Sanderson doing his best to preserve the enjoyment of the reader of fantasy novels. So, as you can imagine, this magic system plays a massive part in this book, and Brandon Sanderson uses it liberally to solve conflicts throughout the book, and that's kind of satisfying. You know, you do feel like it kind of increases your immersion into this world, because you know your brain starts to work to think, how would I solve this problem by ingesting, you know, platinum or something.
It's very, you know, you feel like you're part of the world.
Yeah.
It's very satisfying as a reader.
So we've just talked about how much magic is used in this book to kind of solve problems and how present it is in the book. So you could almost call that, it's sort of like a high magic fantasy. You know, it's a book that it's hard and it's high. Think of it like drugs. Whereas you have, on the other end of the scale, you might have soft magic books where you don't really understand a lot of the magic, and also it's low, doesn't really come into the plot so much. So I think the classic example of a soft, low magic system would be in the First Law series by Abercrombie.
Yeah.
You know, he rarely ever uses magic to solve issues in the plot, like maybe Baez, for example.
Occasionally exploding someone.
But we
don't understand where his power comes from, we don't understand how it works, and he very rarely uses it.
Yeah, and to be honest, he's not really a main character.
No.
You know, Logan, he has a magic sword. That's not really where his power comes from. His power comes from just being badass.
Yeah.
Like Giselle is like a damp squib. He's not magical at all.
No.
So I think that's a really good example of the opposite end of the scale. You know, maybe if you didn't enjoy Mistborn, maybe you'd enjoy the First Law just on that basis.
Although, don't you dare.
I'm putting it on top of a book, don't worry.
Okay.
There, it's safe. It's safe. Don't hurt me, Laura. That gives you an idea of the scales. Let's talk about one other feature of magic systems, which is the power. So what endows the users with their power? Back to that Mistborn analogy, ingesting metals gives the Allomancers their power. But there are other sources of power. And do you want to talk a little bit about
Yeah, so there are 4 main categories of power source that I've roughly defined. There are different lists online that you can find that I've kind of compiled for us. So the first ones are kind of the inherited power sources. You can probably think of a few off the top of your head. The obvious ones being Harry Potter. We don't stand J.K. Rowling at Hardy's Book Towers. We love the LGBTQ plus community.
So a better example that we do stand
would be The Assassin's Apprentice and the Farseer trilogy and the Realm of the Elderlings more broadly, where there's a wonderful hard magic system called the Wit and the Skill, and they are 2 related magic systems where the users can connect with either a animal or a human, dependent on which of the 2 magic systems they are proficient in. The majority of the time it tends to run in families. There are communities of people who foster those abilities.
There are coteries of people who are proficient in this that are then used by, you know, powerful people to proceed their ends, you know. And you can already start to imagine like some of the ways in which you could use a magic system that revolves around influencing people and animals to solve plot issues.
Yeah.
So, you know, I think it's a testament to how well Robin Hobb has defined these mechanics, that she is able to employ them, particularly when we look at some of the plot points happening around Buckkeep and further abroad, and how that magic is employed to defend Buckkeep. You know, you really start to see how the extremes, you know, you're taking an idea and then you're kind of following it to its logical conclusion and going, wow, these are some kind of very imaginative ways in which you could use this tool in your toolbox.
Yeah, this is my favourite series possibly of all time. I made a whole video about how much I love it, which Ross is pointing to a link to right now.
Yeah.
So if you haven't watched that, please go and watch it.
Absolutely.
This is an amazing series. Please read it if you haven't already.
We've talked about a few systems, but if we're going to plot down our top 5, Mistborn at the top, Farseer trilogy and the Realm of the Elderlings.
Probably number 2.
Probably number 2.
Yeah. Moving on from inherited systems, there's the second mechanism for gaining your power that I have broadly categorised is kind of physical or conduit mechanisms. So by that I mean using runes, like a physical mechanism, or by using spells, so physically saying some words, or like using script or writing or something like that, you know, like a physical action or physical objects in order to manifest your power.
I think this one is probably where I gravitate to in my reading and my writing. I can think of 2 very good examples of books that in fact, 3 examples of books that I absolutely love that kind of fall into this pattern.
Okay.
Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell.
I knew you were going to say this one.
This is my new Folio Society copy.
This is his new flex. This is his Folio Society special edition. Woo!
In this book, which is a soft magic system in that we don't understand a lot of the capabilities, it's almost like there is a finite limitation to magic, but it's all in books and written hundreds of years ago, and these books are all stored in Mr. Norrell's collection, and he hoards them and he doesn't let other people read them. The spells contained in these books are the work of, master magicians who have kind of approached spellcraft like it's their PhD, and there are these weird rituals that go around the manifesting of these spells. It's sort of similar to runes, but then other kind of ways in which these manifest too. And they're also magical beings and a kind of magical realm. Susanna Clarke preempts the use of some of these spells to then solve plot issues. And this is where she actually, I think, slightly goes against Brandison's first rule.
Sandon Brandison.
Sander Brandison. She actually uses the discovery of some of these spells. It's sort of like
Sanderson.
Okay, right. Now that's So she uses the method of the discovery of some of these spells as a kind of like a tension, like a mystery which keeps you hooked, so that when the mechanic of the spell is kind of finally unlocked and used in the real world to solve a problem, it doesn't feel cheap. So I think it's a masterful work of writing.
Yeah, but the difference with that is that the not knowing is part of the story.
Write that down if you've got a pen. Let's talk about another physical / conduit book / magic system, which would be A Wizard of Earthsea by Ursula Guin. And related to this, The Name of the Wind by Patrick Rothfuss. Now, both of these books use naming as a method for magical control. So knowing the true name of a person or a thing or a force allows you to have some governance over it. So The Name of the Wind is unique in that it kind of, that's not the only method of magic in it. It kind of, you have almost like soft and hard magic in Name of the Wind. But let's talk about A Wizard of Earthsea. The idea of knowing the true name to something kind of spans this whole book. And wizards kind of guard their true names because, if someone knew their name, then of course they would have power over them. So Ged / Sparrowhawk, goes by multiple names throughout the book, but always hiding his true name so that no one can tell him what to do or command him against his will.
Laura and Ross aren't our real names.
No.
And you'll never know our real names. Nuh-uh.
You'll never know that my name is Mephistopheles.
The third of the 4 categories that I've laid out for us is environmental / elemental. And this is a really, really cool one, and one that I'm using in my own writing at the moment. And this is where the magic users are drawing on something in the world around them, be that the weather, be that something in the earth, the obvious ones being earth, water, fire and air.
So of course we're thinking, long ago the 4 nations lived in harmony, then everything changed when the Fire Nation attacked. Only the Avatar, master of all 4 elements, could stop them, but when the world needed him most, he vanished. That's kind of what we're talking about.
In Avatar The Last Airbender, where he's drawing on air, obviously. Can you tell I've not seen it?
This is a crime.
I read books!
Let's talk about your favourite elemental magic, Laura.
Yes. A really, really cool example is my fave that we've discussed and we've done a book club episode on that we'll link to up here. In Rivers of London.
By Ben Aaronovitch.
By Ben Aaronovitch. In Rivers of London, as we've discussed in videos previously, there are characters who draw their power from their home rivers, which are tributaries of the River Thames. Primary ones being Mama and Father Thames, who are the genie loci of the River Thames itself. And their children, the main ones being Beverly Brook. There is Tyburn Fleet, again, a tributary of the River Thames.
This is it's interesting though, because that's not even like they're drawing their power from it. They are literally manifestations of those places.
But that's a really cool example of an elemental magic system.
Just to talk about this the Rivers of London for a second, one of the things that Ben Aaronovitch does really well is he sets up. So there's also, again, the spells element. There's the physical / conduit magic, but he uses the rules that he set up using magic near circuits like brains or alarm clocks.
Yeah,
breaks those circuits and kind of causes them to fizzle out and melt. So he sets that up really well and then uses that later in the books to kind of like solve issues. So I guess you could also include Mistborn in this kind of category.
You absolutely could. That's kind of an alchemical or a material magic system. The other major work of Brandon Sanderson being the Stormlight Archive, where the magic users can draw power of the storms, of the high storms. Another really cool elemental magic system is chromaturgy in the Lightbringer series by Brent Weeks. This is a really, really cool one. The magic system in the Lightbringer series involves the magic users drawing their power from the light spectrum. So different magic users can draw from different colours of the light spectrum. So there are ultraviolet drafters, there are red drafters, blue drafters. It's so cool. And then randomly there are rogue black drafters and white drafters. Ooh. It's dope.
Black is the absence of light, Laura. How is that supposed to work?
Well, that's why.
Clearly Brent Weeks has never read physics.
That's why there's one called the Burning White.
Oh, and this is the Black Prism.
Well, yeah.
Oh. Isaac Newton, pay attention. So we talked about 3 different sources of magic.
There is one more.
There is one more. And do you want to talk a bit about that?
So the final one that I've kind of categorised for us to talk about is when you draw your power from the supernatural or the spiritual, or from some kind of faith more generally. So that is when you're gaining your powers from the ethereal plane, or from cosmic energy, or from celestial heavenly spirits.
I think a really good example of this one would actually be Gardens of the Moon. To be honest, I was hesitant to talk about it because I don't really understand it. I don't really understand anything about this series.
Is that because it's a soft magic system, or just because you weren't paying attention?
Both and.
Yes.
So in this, the magic users draw their power from warrens, and warrens are sort of like places, like spiritual realms that are governed by gods. So essentially, it's sort of a similar thing. But I'm going to stop talking about it there before I say something that isn't true.
Okay, I'm going to talk about one which I'm very sorry to say I actually didn't enjoy, but is a very clever magic system.
Okay. That's all that matters.
So the Villain series by V.E. Schwab works on the magic users gaining their abilities through experiencing a near-death experience.
Oh, that's kind of cool.
It's cool. It's cool. It's kind of a superhero book paired with a fantasy book. It's cool. It's just not for me. I've just never really been into superheroes, unfortunately. This is for sale. It's a Barnes & Noble special edition. It's signed by V.E. Schwab herself.
Never stop hustling. I think probably the most famous example of a divine magic system, one that comes from spiritual realms, and another example of probably, again, that kind of soft magic system is, of course, Lord of the Rings by J.R.R. Tolkien.
This book is mashed.
It's mashed and it's got dust on the top.
That's from where... Ugh! That was disgusting!
So, in Lord of the Rings, we never really quite understand how Gandalf's power works. He has a staff that, then Grima says, "I told you to take his staff!" But what the staff does isn't exactly clear. We have the Balrog, like an ancient kind of being created by Morgoth.
We have Galadriel, who's this ethereal creature that just lives forever and is super, super powerful.
It kind of
I passed the test. I remain Galadriel.
So all these very powerful people or creatures.
Tell me, where is Gandalf?
I much desire to speak with you. All these very powerful people and creatures, they can trace their roots back to the gods of Middle Earth, Eru Iluvatar creating all of the Ainur and all that. So there is very much a spiritual realm to this magic, but Tolkien gives us absolutely no indication as to how any of that works, apart from perhaps the One Ring, which we understand that manifests
how
in
does
different ways.
How does the One Ring work? Where does that get its power from?
Sauron put all of his power into it.
Yeah, but where does he get his power from?
Well, maybe that's a good place to kind of draw this video to a conclusion. We've talked a lot about mechanisms. We've talked a lot about the roots of magic. We talked about how, the laws of magic. But ultimately, in Lord of the Rings, Tolkien doesn't really care about any of that. And somehow he still crafted the seminal work of fantasy. So, if you're thinking about putting a magic system in your book, go ahead. It's going to be fantastic. But just know, if you're writing from the heart, writing something you really want to write, you might not need to go all the way. Is that bullshit?
Yeah.
Find us on Instagram and TikTok at Hardy's Books. Go to hardysbooks.co.uk and go and buy a book, even that copy of Vengeful over there. Like and subscribe. And we'll see you in the next video. Did we even decide what our top 5 was?
No,
never mind.
We'll
see you soon.
Why couldn't the Eagles just have flown the ring to Mordor?
No!